I'm here with George Collins, who's a Masters Politics student from Graduate College, and you're running to be Activities Officer. So can you tell me a bit more about the experience you've got for the role?
So, first of all, thank you for letting me come here today and for your time. So, the experience I've got, I've done 2 years on an exec, so I've served as General Secretary and Treasurer as a combined role, so I was carrying both those at the same time. And I've also served as president, and that was for the Comedy Society. Now, yeah, it's a small society, I'll give it that, but it's quite close-knit. So sometimes when issues arise, you've got to get them sorted because the effects can be pretty dodgy at times. And I did the role well, in my opinion. The aims I had, sort of increase diversity, get more women involved, I met, and it was a great success. The targets I set to get more people doing sort of semi-regional competitions. So we had 2 people go to Manchester. You know, I set the goals and I delivered on them. I've also been a conductor for Music Society, so weekly rehearsals for a band of around 40 individuals. And again, what I've set out to do in that role, I've achieved. We've kept, a really great atmosphere going that people love. People have said it's the best time of their week, their favourite rehearsal, and I've consistently kept good attendance. So, my track record is I create great environments, I can boost diversity, make things accessible, which is one of my key campaign pledges, and deliver on the sort of aims I set, really.
Now, in your manifesto, you've split it up into 3 sections. You've got lower the bar, raise the bar, and go to the bar. Yes. So if we start off with lower the bar, you've been talking about wanting to improve the accessibility. Could you explain a little bit more about that and precisely what you've got in mind? Yeah,
so the lower the bar is essentially lower the bar to entry. So that is mainly what I'd like to do. Is my number 1 goal in that area is to maintain and secure the access students, or the Society Access Fund for next year. I know it's being piloted this term. If you look on the SU newsletters, it's coming through. They want feedback and it to be used for it to sort of be secured again. I think something like that to be piloted, pilot it, yes, but you've got to just maintain it. It might have to change, but I think something like that is so crucial to lowering that barrier to entry. I know some societies are great. They charge very low entry fees to join. Some are a bit more expensive, so if people that are from more disadvantaged backgrounds can't afford that, they need help to do it, because activities, societies and sports at Lancaster are, in my opinion, what make it so great to be here. Even once you've got into the societies as well and past that initial barrier, you've got to pay for equipment, sporting costs, trips, and it can stack up quite considerably. So that is my main thing in keeping people and societies accessible for everyone, really.
And to move on to raise the bar, you talked about wanting to improve, the quality of societies and sports groups. You talked as well about completing the sports review and implementing that. Could you explain a little bit more about raising the bar? Yeah,
so raise the bar is really just increase the standards that are currently there. On the whole, I don't think the SU does an awful job. I think it's pretty good overall, but from my experience, I've identified a couple of places I think could be tweaked. One of these in particular is, I know societies will probably hate me, reaffiliation. It needs changing, but there's one thing I really want to add into that. Or if it's not adding into reaffiliation, it's a workshop to be offered to all student execs, and that is I want to set up something and work with the LU Disability Forum to create more training for exec members, particularly on helping people with disabilities, and from my experience, people who are neurodivergent, because that has been one thing that I've had issue with in the past, that I've gone to the SU and there's not been much help available to me, really, and I've known individuals that it's had a quite a horrific impact on, really, in the way they've been treated. And the reason that happened was because the execs didn't know how to handle certain situations and help people to work with people to benefit everyone. So that is a really important thing I want to do, work with the disabilities teams here to implement that. And also staff accessibility is a big thing. The amount of times I've been in the SU, for example, on society drop-in sessions, just the other day, somebody came in for a drop-in session, there was no one there to run it. Obviously there was a breakdown in communication, that information hadn't been put out, but if elected, I would like to be there at key times for societies and students, particularly Wednesday afternoons, when sports are all going on, so that if there is an issue with transport or anything, I will be there. Or someone, okay, I'm not operational, I'm political in that role if I am there. However, I can at least take it on person to person and get it actioned as soon as possible. I think not having people there at key times when needed is really poor.
And to complete the trio, you want to go to the bar as well.
Yeah, so we've lowered the bar, we've raised the bar, and now we're going to the bar. And it's not about getting boozy. I know not everyone's about that. But I think we've got a great campus here that could be used for so much more. I think, particularly living on campus a lot during my time here, I think so much more could be done with university bars. They're often quite quiet, even on some like the big nights, Fridays. I think I'd like to work with sort of a lot of the entertainment performance societies to get like a nice rota in place, and work with the JCRs as well so we can strike like a rota, get it out in advance so people know there's going to be entertainment, gigs, anything on at different bars at different weeks. I remember last term, was it last year perhaps, they did £2 pints. It was pretty poorly advertised. People love a £2 pint. It's great news for everyone, really. So that's what I'd like to do, make more of the campus environment, get performance societies in there so everyone can benefit from them. I don't want the go to the bar to be emphasis on the booze though. I know we've got quite a growing sober society here in Lancaster now, and the non-alcoholic range of drinks is pretty poor. I don't think there's a single bar that's got a non-alcoholic beer on tap. That's one thing I'd like to lobby them to do, just anything. Heineken Zero is pretty good. Sam, I'm pretty versed in this, I won't go on too much. But there are some really good non-alcoholic alternatives these days that are just sort of brushed under the carpet, I think. So you go to a bar, J2O or Coke. If you're not drinking, they're like your only options, really. More non-alcoholic alternatives to please everybody and make them a more inclusive sort of environment for everyone, really, that they can all enjoy.
Now, Activities Officer is a new role. It's broadly combining the jobs of VP Societies and Media and VP Sports. You talked a bit about the experience you've got in societies, but have you got enough experience in sports, do you think, to take on this role?
Definitely. I'm a pretty quick learner. I'm open to collaboration with everyone. I'm hoping to have a meeting with the relevant individuals before the campaigning period starts so that I can get a full grasp of how the sporting side of it works. Like I said, in raising the standards, I've been in the union before when members of a team have come in and they've asked to speak to an individual, and there's been nobody there to help them with an issue at the time, which was pretty pressing. From what I gathered, their coach hadn't turned up on a Wednesday for a Bucks game. That's pretty dodgy. Somebody should have been there to help sort that. So one thing on that sports side is I will be there at key times for the sports fixtures on the Wednesday afternoons to be there to help resolve any issues. And like I said, I want to fully make sure the sports review is implemented correctly and properly done so that it's good for everyone involved, especially the recreational sports as well, because they are accessible to everyone, great fun, and really good for everyone involved there, really.
Have you got any more details on precisely what you'll be focusing on implementing with the sports review?
Not at this moment in time. I'll be completely open and honest about that. But like I say, I'm waiting to have a meeting with the relevant individuals involved so I can flesh that idea further out in my head.
Now you've got societies leagues as well, which are a relatively new concept which help to improve communication between societies and student media and the Students' Union. Are you satisfied with the progress that's been made there? Do you think there's more that could be done?
I think they're doing a good job of bringing people together and making sort of collaboration more likely to happen. I think there's always more that can be done. There's always things you can tweak, have a look at, try and get more people involved. So that's something I'd like to look at just to see how it's working so far and see. And I think the thing is, one of the things like this, I can say X, Y, and Z now. What I really want to do is sit down, if elected, have a chat with society to see how they think it's working. It's great asking me how I think it's working, but really the people that are involved need to be asked, and also more importantly those who aren't involved, so we can see why they're not and then try and get them on board as well to get that better.
You talked as well about wanting to implement a media summit for the student media organisations on campus. That's Bailrigg FM and LA1TV, Scan the student newspaper and Take Two the cinema. Some people might not know, but the activities officer role, rather than being sports and societies and media, it's sports, societies and media as three separate things. So what do you think is there to be gained from treating media as a separate entity, and what could be the benefit of a specific summit just for student media?
Well, this idea came around from speaking to personnel in the SU who've had experience on the issue. I gather it's been done before and it was successful, and the aim of it was to boost engagement throughout the year rather than just at the key points, sort of freshers and then refreshers, but to keep people engaging with it all through year long. And I think treating them differently isn't sort of segregating them, treating them differently, it's assisting them in different ways. One of my manifesto points was to help sports, societies and media with sort of unique frameworks to them. From people I've spoken to, that I've been told how the media side of things have very unique issues that can't quite be addressed the same as everything else. So I think having this huge catch-all thing for everyone at the minute, societies, media, and even within societies there's subsections and stuff, that things need to be looked at through a finer lens to see how best resources and time can be spent and help issued to actually improve things for media, sports and societies as separate somewhat entities, because they're all so individual, different needs and different struggles that need to be met.
A big priority for VP Sports is implementing Roses and overseeing that. And there have been concerns that with the merging of sports with societies and media, that societies might be kind of left behind a bit in Lent term when a lot of the focus is on Roses. Are you concerned that that could be an issue, and how would you work to address that if you were elected?
I am actually quite concerned that could be an issue, because I've heard of last year that there were some real sort of downfalls in how, I don't know about the York side of things, but how our media teams were treated in York. It wasn't great from what I gather. So going forward, I think the sports societies are getting, post-COVID, Roses was a little bit iffy. It's getting better. More needs to be done. But I think if I get into the role, one of the issues I've picked up is that there are very few people around now that were here pre-COVID that are now helping with Roses. I admit I'm one of those people that are post-COVID now. But we need to work hard to get it back to what it was before, particularly for the societies and media side of things, where standards need to be improved again. And if we can get this Home Roses Lancaster here up and running again to full force, media on point again, societies top of their game, sports winning again, I think if we set that standard, York will have to repeat it and show it is back, and then everyone's better off for it.
Is there anything else which you'd like to mention before the end of the interview?
No, just a vote for me will be, like I say, a vote to lower the bar, raise the bar and go to the bar, with a big emphasis on accessibility and better standards.
Thank you very much, George.
Thank you.
I'm joined by Jack Watson, who's our current Vice President for Sports, and he's running for Activities Officer. So, Jack, your role's been combined with societies and media. First of all, how pleased are you about that change?
Yeah, mixed emotions, I think. When we sort of began the discussions around it, it was kind of, are the roles fit for purpose, and what sort of changes can we make to improve it? I think it was clear from the get-go that if there was going to be any changes, it would be a combination of the societies and the sport role. For me, it's more excitement than anything else. I think a lot of the work that I've done this year for sport groups, it's the perfect opportunity to just expand that work to more people. The main concern was workload. Can one person do two people's jobs? I think what we've kind of worked out is there's a lot of duplicate work going on, and having one well-resourced individual doing the same work but for more people, it's kind of a bit of a no-brainer in terms of how do you make changes to that team, and how can we make improvements on it. So yeah, for me, really excited to just carry on stuff that I'm doing this year, but also create that wider impact to the rest of our shooting groups, really.
Well, you've got the sports experience, obviously, but you'd be taking on the role of being in charge of societies and media as well. And in your manifesto, quite a lot of what you've talked about is sports-based. Do you really think you've got what it takes to represent societies as well? Yeah,
completely. I think that's completely normal sort of perception to have around it. Yeah, correct. Have been focused on sport this year. Have had the great opportunity this year to kind of fill in where the current societies officer hasn't been able to around particularly society affiliations, the process around that, a lot of the funding requests that societies have put in, the sort of process of that I've been involved in this year. I've also been to a couple of the Society League Forum events, and obviously preparing for Roses is not just a sport event. Worked with yourselves, worked with student media quite closely the last few months just to make sure that you guys are happy in the run up to Roses, our society groups that participate in Roses. So yeah, I think from the outside you probably make that sort of yeah, the sort of presumption is that it's kind of, I'm just focused on societies, I don't really know what focused on sport, don't really know what the society's aspect is, but actually I'd argue that I'm in probably the only position where I know the issues that come from sport teams, they're very similar to the society teams, but also the unique challenges that society groups face, and I've been quite lucky to work with them this year, and like I say, in the various positions where I've been able to help have really enjoyed it. And though, you know, clearly the groups operate quite differently, but where it comes to the main issues that people face, generally they're pretty similar and they're mostly the same.
You've talked about having a look at the Societies League events, and you've talked a bit in your manifesto about wanting to continue that and maybe expand upon it. Is there anything you'd be looking to change?
I think just needs a bit of a step back. Obviously, Danny 2 years ago did some great work in setting it up, and then Santi this year has done fantastic work in driving it forwards and sort of expanding the offer that sort of Societies Committee has. I think now is a perfect opportunity to kind of take a step back, look at how we do Sport Committee, look at how we do Societies Committee. Can we sort of make sure that they're both fit for purpose? Can we make sure that they have maximum engagement? I know one thing we've struggled with this year, particularly with Societies Committee, is just the engagement of the events, particularly the forum events that we have, engagement with getting people into those positions. And I think if individuals are volunteering themselves to be in those sort of higher student leadership positions of Sport Committee, Societies Committee, they need to be rewarded for it and it needs to be recognised.
Well, you've talked about a programme to recognise student volunteers as well.
Yeah, definitely. Something that Lancaster lacks in massively. In doing this for a year, you have great opportunities to meet other sabbatical officers at other institutions. And something that, you know, like Liverpool, MMU, they have really good, really established student volunteer recognition programmes. They do it slightly differently, but essentially most of them are sort of like point-based. I've volunteered this many hours on these committees, I've done this training, and this is what I get out of it, whether it's sort of, I know at the minute we have a loose connection to the Lancaster Award, but it's nothing really, is it? We need to have a system which recognises what people do, recognises the work they put in and actually rewards that, whether that's something that's credit bearing, whether that's something that's just sort of digital recognition, whether it's physical, like vouchers or any kind of way we can kind of recognise our student leaders. They put a phenomenal amount of work in each year and it needs to be recognised.
And is that a programme which you'd want to implement through the Students' Union, or would you want to work with the university to have that accredited by them?
I think it depends. I think it involves knowing who to talk to, having the right conversations with the right people. If the credit bearing option was a way that you'd want to go down and a route that you want to take, definitely something that I'd want to work towards. But it's having the right conversations with the right people in the right rooms and knowing who to speak to actually get those wheels in motion. I think for now what we need is just to start off with the basics and start off with an actual way of recognising the work that people put in, and then working out actually what is it that we can give, and what is it that we can show our gratitude for.
You've talked as well about wanting to expand training for student officers. Could you explain exactly what that would look like and how you'd work to implement it?
Yeah, 100%. So we did a bit of work with the sport execs this year with, obviously the staff team had quite a high turnover, but one thing that we wanted to make sure we did was develop an in-person training programme, which we did, took a lot of learnings from, a lot of sessions that we did, had one-to-ones with each of our sport execs between implementing that programme and what we want to do over the summer this year, to work out exactly what it is that execs need, what they want, and where we're lacking, and that is primarily around a lot of wellbeing and welfare training and support for people. The in-person sessions we did for sport, the combination of the sport and societies role is a perfect time to just standardise our student leader training programme and make sure that what we do have is well resourced from both teams, is clear on what we can do for them. I think that developing an in-person programme where people can show up, get involved, learn from each other, not just the people that are developing the training sessions, and actually, you know, do some stuff which is worthwhile. There's a lot of gaps particularly around, you know, setting up Union Cloud memberships. How does Union Cloud work? How do you finance a club? How do you finance a society? Who do you speak to about this? Who do you speak to about that? There's a lot of gaps around the place. So.
Now, as an incumbent officer, one of the parts of your election campaign is obviously what you've been able to implement so far. So what achievements as Vice President of Sports are you proudest of?
That's a good question. I think that, 7 months in now, I think, out of 12, or 7 or 8, I can't remember off the top of my head what it is. Done a lot of work the first few months establishing what is it that you do as a political officer and where is it that your efforts need to be prioritised. Pretty proud to say that the sport review will be finished come September and fully implemented, which we're working a lot this year to get that finished. The sportswear tender is well on its way to be finished this year. The new Sport Access Fund pilot, which we're running this term, should hopefully be implemented fully for the next academic year. And that's not just for sport, the same model that I sort of put forward for sport, we're also using for societies, which should hopefully go a long way in providing that, particularly around the cost of living, the support that's kind of needed in those areas. Again, the in-person training sessions that we did for sport and the work that I want to do for improving the handovers of the committees from one committee to the next. This was a manifesto item from last year, which was going to be delivered, or has been delivered, which can hopefully help those sport execs, but particularly, I mean, it's the same work really for each exec. How you onboard your new committee, when you do it, how you run your elections, what your constitution looks like, that kind of support around filling the holes and filling the gaps and helping them transition from one committee to the next is really important. Yeah, and other things. I mean, there's a lot of things going behind the scenes which is not a political officer's job to do. The delivery of a lot of sport and the delivery of societies is not a political officer's job to do. But helping finance and society and sport teams and working out a way of bringing financing in-house has been quite a big project for this year, which is going to go ahead, which can hopefully, finish by September. Yeah, and generally sort of facilitating the voices of students and making sure they're in the right rooms. Establishing the sport committee has been a big part of that.
Well, of course, as well, you've been incredibly involved in the planning for Roses 2024. Mm-hmm. Do you think, as activities officer, there's a concern that in that time the activities officer will be spending too much time on Roses, which is primarily a sporting activity? Like, quickly, how would you ease concerns that societies would go effectively ignored during Lent term?
Yeah, I think definitely a valid concern to have. Obviously, Roses is predominantly sport teams, but it's, we're in quite a fortunate position where we have a very well equipped and very good operational team in the Students' Union that deliver Roses. The activities officer role would be to chair Roses Committee and form the Roses Committee. So that's around constitutional changes of Roses and primarily how things operate, which usually happens sort of end of first term, start of second term. In the build up to Roses, it's then coordinating, making sure the likes of student media are happy, making sure that preparation is going ahead for that. But really, a lot of the grunt work for Roses is done by the operational team and isn't by the activities officer. So yeah, completely understand those concerns around, are you just going to be focused on sport teams? Actually, probably not. I think that particularly around the Roses Committee, that you have committees of students there to help an activities officer in prioritising workload and make sure you're doing the right job at the right time. There's Roses Committee to help with Roses decisions, there's Sport Committee to help with sport decisions, there's Societies Committee to help with societies decisions. I think that those roles in particular of those student groups and the student leaders will really go a long way in helping prioritise the workload of the activities officer and make sure they're doing the right thing at the right time.
And is there anything else you'd like to say quickly before the end of the interview?
No, not really. I just think that, really love doing this job. I think I've done a pretty good job so far and kind of, want to carry that work on. And you're in a great position as an incumbent officer to then not spend the first 4 months of office trying to get the grip of the job and sort of what the job is. It goes a long way to carry on the work that you've been doing and really make a bit more of an impact. Loved every second of it. And just encourage everyone to, you can see from the candidate pool this year that there's been a lot more interest around the role, which is brilliant. And I think as long as we maintain that interest throughout sort of the campaigning period and the voting period, and just encourage people to get involved, get voting, read the manifestos, make your decisions around who you think's best, and get voting really, because it's an important election to have, and I think that it's important that we keep working on getting people involved and get voting really.
Thank you very much, Jack.
No, thanks.
you.
Yeah, cheers.
Bye. I'm here with Kyle, who's a third-year sport and exercise science student from Fylde College, and he's running to be activities officer. So, Kyle, firstly, you've talked in your manifesto about wanting to improve communication in the SU. Could you explain precisely how you plan to do that?
Well, I plan to be a bit more approachable by clubs, because I found that it's hard to get in contact with the SU. They're a bit like a higher source for clubs across campus and for societies as well. So I'm trying to make it so I'm constantly approachable. If you want to come have a meet, I'll try and have meetings throughout a week, so then people can actually come and talk and see if they have any issues or if they want any advice on how to run their club or society.
Okay, and you've talked as well in your manifesto about wanting to promote inclusivity in sports. What kind of inclusivity have you got in mind there?
So I want to try and get more people of different genders and different who identify it as different sexualities, to try and get more involved in sport and societies across campus, as there seems to be a bit of a underrepresentation in sport especially. And also we want to make it so it's not exclusive for people who can afford to do the sport. So if they are to contact the SU, then they can get a grant that I've been talking with the current sports committee that I've been on this year to try and help fund for them to play the sport, and it doesn't inhibit them from joining the sport.
And what specific policies would you want to impose to promote inclusivity?
So I'd try and impose that people try and, so clubs and societies, for example, try and make it more inclusive, so they try and bring more people in from different backgrounds rather than just having the same background. For example, rugby league for me, I've been a member for almost 3 years, and it's been very male orientated, and there's not many people who are identified across sexualities, for example. Like, we've only had one gay rugby player, but we want to try and include that more. We want to try and get inclusivity up, so we want to try and make it more aware for people, for example in the LGBTQ forum, to try and get to enjoy sports as other people do across campus.
Speaking as a queer person, I think that a major obstacle to inclusion in sports can be a feeling that maybe you're not welcome, that there can be prevailing attitudes of homophobia or transphobia in sports. What could you do to ease queer people's concerns that they might not feel welcome in different sporting clubs?
So I think that at some point, if I'm to carry on go on as activities officer, it's to try and get more open forums. So, for example, we had the women's forum a couple of weeks ago to get more women involved in sport. So something like that, so LGBTQ forums to get involved in sport, to answer queries and try and get all clubs to come down so they can understand more why people feel as though they have been singled out as such and they don't feel welcomed as much.
Do you think that part of the problem can be attitudes existing within sports clubs? Do you think that there can be a culture of homophobia or bigotry in these clubs?
I think there's more, so it can be that there's more of a stereotype as such that they have in sport, so then people don't feel included in that stereotype. For example, I'm very much a very stereotypical rugby player, but we want to try and break those stereotypes and try and get more people into sport and make people actually feel included. So we want to, so through them forums, for example, it would try and get more people to actually do sports, no matter what stereotype, no matter what sexuality or gender they are. Just try and get them involved in sport.
And you've talked as well about wanting to reduce financial costs and barriers to entry there. What would you plan on doing to make sports more affordable to students?
Well, currently there's plans in there to try, by the SU to try and help people who are struggling, and there is a policy coming in place that helps people who may be struggling financially at uni. For example, they can't afford it, or that their parents can't afford to help them fund to play the sport and they can only just come to uni. So through the SU there could be helps and ways to fund and get as many people across campus involved in sport and societies.
And what precisely might that look like in practice?
So this might be giving a Sport Lancaster membership, because it's £65 to get a Sport Lancaster membership, and you need that to access the sports centre. So this might be that the student union help subsidise that cost to help the people to afford it, or it could be to help the person afford equipment, for example football boots, or it could be a hockey stick because they can't afford one, or it can be fluctuated depending on what needs are there.
Now, in most of your manifesto and in your background as a candidate as well, you're mostly sports focused, but
Yes.
the activities officer role would now incorporate societies and media
Yes.
as well. Do you think you've got the necessary experience to represent societies and media?
Yeah, I believe so, because I've been doing filed pool as well. So even though that's a sport, it's very much a society related aspect, and I've been running the media side of filed sports as well, alongside the media officer there. So I have the background enough to know how to run, for example, an Instagram page, or to help to promote inclusivity, for example. And I want to try and make it clear that even though I've come from a sporting background, I can understand how to run a society or a sport club. For example, doing joint socials with Lou Dance, who have been a great partnership with Rugby League this year. So I know many people who can help me if I'm struggling with how some people may struggle with societies, but generally I've been helping to run Fire Pool, for example, which is a less sport-based society, and it's more a culture-based society, if you understand what I mean.
And one concern which I think there's been amongst quite a lot of societies is that, especially in Lent term, when there's a lot of planning for roses, societies might feel a bit neglected. They might not get the attention they need off their FTO.
Yeah.
How would you assuage those concerns?
Well, for first thing, Rugby League do not have a fixture at Roses, because we, unfortunately, York don't have a team. So I can understand the feeling of neglect a bit from not having the the foresight from the student union. So the student union could, so through that, the student union could try and make it so they are involved in Roses, for example. So, for example, Lou Dance, they do competed against York, or it can be different competitions. For example, you could do different types of dance, like Spanish dancing. For example, they could have a competition against Roses. There's multiple ways that they can get involved. For example, cheerleading can get involved in Roses as well, through supporting other clubs, and it's just trying to bring up the whole atmosphere around Roses and get everyone involved rather than just sports clubs, if you understand what I mean.
Now, is there anything else which you'd want to say before the interview ends?
I'd just like to say, please, can you vote for me? I'd really like to stay a part of this university, as it is a great culture around it, and if I've got an Instagram page if you'd like to follow. That's for vote for. It's Kyle for Activities. Sorry. And it's the number 4. So if you have any questions, please just pop me a message. I'm happy to answer any questions, and I hope that everyone gets there on voting day.
Thank you very much, Kyle. I'm here with Tom Porter, who's a second-year criminology student and a comms officer for County College. So Tom, you're going for Activities. Can you tell me a bit more about the experience you've got for the role?
So the experience that I've got is obviously, as you mentioned, I'm one of the media and comms officers for County College. So I applied for this role. I originally applied for this as a co-options at the start of the year. I was up against some other people as well, so I didn't get that role at the time. But then I applied again for the big elections, got accepted for that. So I've had a bit of experience with this. I've been creating media for the Instagram accounts. I've also basically been going around campus, having meetings with many people, trying to organise events, trying to organise comms, and also been in some training sessions for that as well.
The first thing you've pointed out in your manifesto is that you want to improve inclusivity and awareness about neurodivergence and mental health problems in sports and societies. What precisely would you want to implement to do this? I'd like to get the university team and the LUSU team to bring in some professionals to give in-person courses to execs of the societies. I'd like to have some mandatory trainings for at least 2 members of each exec, specifically the wellbeing officer and most likely the president, because I think this will be really useful for the members of the exec for when they're hosting society events and stuff like that. Is that something which you think the Students' Union could afford to implement? Mental health professionals can be quite expensive.
Yeah, I think they could definitely implement it to some degree. I've spoken with the current officers and they've said it is quite doable. They've already mentioned that they've been looking at doing some training sessions, but I'd like to definitely expand on that and make sure that there is a much more thorough process for this for the exec members.
You've suggested as well putting on the students' website a way for alumni of societies and sports clubs to donate. What kind of revenue do you imagine this could bring in for these societies?
I'm not entirely sure on the sort of revenue it could bring in, but I thought it would be a brilliant opportunity for societies to receive more funding aside from LUSU, because I know for the small societies and for the non-sport societies, there's maybe not as much funding coming through, because specifically for book societies, for book sports teams, they get a lot more funding to go towards their training and for their teams. But then for the small societies, they're not getting as much from LUSU. So I believe it's going to be sorry, it's going to be another avenue for revenue for them. Hopefully it could bring in a few hundred from alumni for each society, but I'm not entirely sure on the exact figures that it could bring.
You've talked as well about wanting to streamline society affiliation. That's something which has been a bit of a problem at the SU for a number of years now. How would you finally tackle this issue?
So I've spoken to the current officers and they've said they have made some progress on this already. They've established some in-person sessions, I believe, and they've spoken to other SUs from around the country. And some of the examples from the other SUs is they have online forms which can be renewed monthly or looked at monthly, submitted monthly for the year. So I believe that it'll be it'll be good to follow the example of the other students' unions, where these forms can be submitted not just one time a year, but they could be looked at, renewed, or submitted when execs are able to do so. And so there's a much clearer guidelines to go around it as well. If we can get some more in-person sessions to teach people how to do this and just to familiarise new exec members with doing this, so it's not all down to the new members as they come into the execs of the societies.
Part of the problem with affiliation, though, is that you've only got a team of, 2 or 3 people employed full-time working on the societies team at LUSU, but there are, more than 150 societies on campus. How many more societies can the SU reasonably sustain, do you think? I'm
not entirely sure the answer to that question, but I believe that having a system where they can be looking at this more often, they can keep looking, they can cover societies throughout the whole year, not just at certain times. I believe they could cover at least, I don't know, another 50 maybe. I'm not sure on the numbers precisely, but from other students' unions, they've if we can follow the subsets of those guys, I think it could be quite achievable to have like 200 societies that are affiliated with the university.
There have been attempts to increase representation for societies in the SU in recent years, and now we've got the Societies Leagues programme. Are you pleased with the progress that's made? Would you want to maintain the existing system? Would you want to change it in any way?
Yeah, so I'm very pleased with the system. I've spoken to Santi about it, and I am like, it is a very good system to have. I believe I wouldn't necessarily change the fundamental aspects of it, but I'd like to continue running those and maybe improve on them, have more sessions, and try and increase the interaction with the society execs, have more societies turn up and partake in these. Okay, and
right, correct me if I'm wrong, but it seems like you've got more experience on the societies side of things than on the sports side of things, but the new activities role incorporates both sports and societies. Do you think that you've got the prerequisite experience with sports to take on this role?
So I haven't had exec roles within sports teams before, but I've been on a JCR for county. I have been in some sports societies before. Outside of university, I do a lot of martial arts. I've done martial arts for about 14 years. And I help to run the martial arts club that I'm part of back home. I do training sessions. I teach other students how to basically do karate. That is the martial art that I do. But I've recently at uni, I've partaken in some martial arts classes. I've not been a member for too long. I've not been on the exec for these. But I believe that outside of university, I do have some leadership experience in sports. Although this is primarily martial arts, so it's not it's not like your prominent main sports teams, but I still believe that I'd be fit for the role and I'd be able to take on a leadership role in sports.
A big part of the role of VP Sports at the moment is preparing for and delivering on roses every single year, and there have been concerns among societies and media that they might get a bit neglected with the activities officer in Lent term, with a lot of focus being put on roses. Do you think that's a valid concern? If so, what would you do to address it if elected?
I absolutely think that's a valid concern. To address this if elected, I'd like to increase more of the society leagues, as mentioned before. I'd like to make sure there is engagement with all societies, the execs of all societies. Obviously, roses is a huge part of the job, and I want to put as much effort as I can into that, but I don't want to take away from other societies whilst doing so. Furthermore, I would also like to look into increasing the availability of more sports teams in roses, because again, with the martial arts, there has been some progress recently where some martial arts have been allowed access to compete in roses, but then others like Muay Thai and kickboxing haven't had that opportunity. And even when they've been competing even when they've been competing with other universities outside of roses, they've not had this opportunity yet, and I believe that it'll be cool to have more societies, more sports societies to be involved in that. But back to the question, I want to make sure that all societies are still getting as much input and cooperation with the activities officer as possible when in that role.
And on the whole, are you pleased with the way that the roles are being reorganised here? Are you pleased with the fact that societies, media and sports is becoming a single role?
I think personally, I am pleased in the sense that I'm not entirely sure. So I'm pleased that they are sort of rearranging the role to sort of suit the SU better. I think that it is a good move to do that, because there are quite a lot of overlap in what we do, but at the same time, it is obviously very useful to have two officers in the role, so that allows them to split more responsibilities. But I still think that under one role, it is absolutely like a role that can be fulfilled well, and I think due to that overlap in sort of the experience of the societies and media officer and then the sports officer, due to the overlap in what we do, I think it is a good idea overall, and I think it is something that will positively impact the Students' Union.
Well, I've touched a bit on this sort of theme already, but a concern is that because it's taking sports and societies and media, which have got a lot in common, but they tend to engage quite different parts of the student community on campus. Do you think that it's possible for anyone in the role to truly represent both communities as well as two separate officers can?
I think it is definitely possible for that. Yeah, I think that one person can definitely represent both communities. Like, for example, it doesn't just have to be that you have a focus on sports or you have a focus on societies and media. I think the focus can be just on all societies in general. You can take into account what sports teams need, you can take into account what society teams need, you can take into account what media teams need. I don't think you need to come at it from the same perspective for each of those people. You can change the way you, I can change the way that I handle requests from each of the societies and teams, but I think I can offer the same opportunities, and I think I can basically be in that role and take on that responsibility for all of those respectively, like, quite well.
Is there anything else you'd like to say before the end of the interview?
I'd just like to say that thank you for the opportunity for being here. This has been good. And I just want to remind everyone that please read everyone's manifestos and vote for who you think will be able to represent you the best.
Thank you very much, Tom. I'm here with Skye, who's a third-year geography student from Lonsdale. Now, Skye, why do you want to run for activities officer?
I mean, I want to give back to the university, really. Like, I've done so much involved with, like, different societies and different sports, and kind of seeing how the systems work. Like, the systems in place are okay, but I want to do something to give back to them all, really, because I've gotten so much from them all, I guess.
The first point you've put on your manifesto is wanting to improve accountability. Could you explain a little bit more about what you've got in mind there and what you'd like to do?
Yeah, so I want to try and create a more centralised sort of complaints procedure, and a way that if you have any issues with with anything in the university, from like well-being to finance or anything, it's kind of all in one place. But not only that, but it means that everything that say victims were to put forward gets taken seriously, because I've had personal experience and other people that have had experiences with the current systems in place where they felt that they haven't been taken seriously, despite the fact that events that have happened have had quite a serious impact on them. And I want to ensure that, particularly with mental health, it's getting worse for students, that these issues that are taken forward then we have a system in place that says, this is what we're going to do, this is what we've done, and can let the people within the situation be fully aware about all of that information.
And would that be working purely on accountability on the side of the SU, or would you want to be implementing, say, better training for mental health on society execs and things like that as well?
I mean, I think it's kind of, my focus is, I think, just like the general behaviour of everyone. That could be extended to increase like training for like welfare officers and things. But my focus is the behaviour, and trying to make sure that those systems in place are there to make people feel like they're supported and they're getting taken seriously with whatever issues that they might have.
Now, to talk a bit about societies, you've got some points in your manifesto about that, about access to the bus, for example. We've also got things like the Societies Access Fund. We've got student leagues, which have been implemented recently. How do you feel in general about this sort of stuff, and what would you be looking to do differently? Yeah,
so I think with the leagues, I personally haven't had any involvement with them. I mean, I've seen them like through the LUSU newsletters and things. I've had mixed opinions from like speaking to different people about them as to like their effectiveness and kind of benefit. But the side of things that I want to focus more on is continuing the work of Santi, who was focusing on accessibility, particularly for those non-buck sports. So, sports, I think, like, for example, ballroom or cheerleading, that do a lot of competing and that at quite a high level, but because they don't do bucks specifically, they don't have that level of funding, despite the fact that actually they're probably equal in terms of maybe training hours and training hours and number of competitions.
And talking about sports, of course, the activities officer, it's a new role which incorporates the jobs of societies and media and sports all at once. You've talked in your manifesto about a lot of the experience which you've got with students, societies and media, but with sports as well, I think it can be quite difficult to get a candidate who's got as much experience in both.
Yeah.
So would it be fair to say you're maybe a little bit weak on the sports end, and if so, how would you work to represent sports as well as societies and media?
I mean, I think I've still got a strong backing in sports. I've been doing archery since I joined university. I also did hockey for about a year and a half. So I've still got quite a strong backing in terms of how the sports societies work. Archery is a buck sport. So I've got that kind of those connections. I feels a bit weaker on the sports side personally, just because I've done slightly less of it than I have with the societies. When it comes to that, tackling those issues, it would be making sure that I'm speaking to the biggest sports on campus and making sure that I'm familiar with those execs and people that are involved, kind of as a starting point, to say, yep, you're the biggest sports. I want to kind of get the gist, kind of in the grips of how things work with you guys, and then kind of take that with me to across the board for other sports as well.
Now, a big responsibility, which is currently under VP Sports, but it would be under the Activities Officer, is dealing with roses, and especially in Lent term, I think there have been concerns from certain societies that with there being such a focus in the build-up to roses, because it's such a massive event, there's so much planning involved, that societies might be a little bit neglected in Lent term. How would you work to offset that if you were elected?
I mean, I think one of the ways would be trying to make roses a bit more accessible to people. Like I've met a lot of people that aren't necessarily sporty, but I could still see them enjoying roses. So making maybe things a bit clearer and say, you might not do sport, but come and look at this event. And then in terms of, so trying to get accessibility in that regard, and then in terms of other society things, help making sure that any events that they do have, particularly I want to say at the beginning of the summer term, I mean it's difficult what with exams happening, but making sure that any events that take place, particularly at the start of that summer term, do get taken seriously and have enough time and necessary funding for those events to make sure that they're just as successful, despite roses taking up obviously quite a lot of time.
And in general, the Activities Officer role, it's taking on two existing roles. It's got the job of sports, the job of societies and media, and the reasoning has been that there's quite a lot of redundancy between the two roles. They do a lot of the same jobs twice, so it can be a job assigned to one person. On the whole, are you happy with the change that has been made, or are you confident that it is a job that can be taken on by one person?
I think it's a difficult one to say, because obviously they were one role originally, and then they've gone to two, and then it's back to one. So I think it's difficult to say as if whether it will be better back as one role, because of how much society's changed since there was last these two roles together, basically. But from what I've spoken to about because I had various meetings with the current FDOs, from what I gather, I think it will make things potentially a lot more efficient, and also then try and get more people involved with those decisions as well.
In both sports and societies, you've mentioned a bit about wanting to improve accessibility, and obviously where you've got people who've got mental health difficulties, that can be a particular obstacle to inclusion. Are there any other sort of groups or demographics where you'd like to focus on promoting inclusivity in sports and societies and expanding it to more students on campus?
Yeah, I mean, quite recently there's been the LGBTQ+ pledge, which I think has been really successful, that I think was organised by Santi. Correct me if I'm wrong. So they've made a start with that way. I think for me going forward, it would be my focus would be trying, particularly with the LUSU website, try and improve things a bit more visually for anyone that maybe has sensory needs or physical needs as well. So trying to promote certain sports that say, oh yeah, you are able to take part in this sport even if you've got whatever mobility or sensory needs. The sport is still very accessible to you, making that sort of really clear to those people.
Now, it's sort of a perennial issue for all Activities Officer, now Societies and Media Vice President in the past, is the issue surrounding society reaffiliation and the affiliation of new societies. People on society execs will complain that reaffiliation is always a very difficult process, and when it comes to creating new societies and getting them affiliated with the university, the difficulty ranges from very hard to, at times, literally impossible. Is there anything which you would like to do to speed up the process or make it easier?
I think it depends on the society. I'm very aware that LUSU have quite a lot of kind of regulations in place to prevent things like two societies doing the same thing for whatever and creating potential conflict. So I'm aware that there are certain rules like that, which obviously I very much respect. But in terms of maybe newer societies, yes, I could definitely fast track that, and making sure that yes, they're quite new, but they're really keen and they want to go for it.
Is there anything else that you'd like to mention before the end of the interview?
You put me on the spot there, mate. I guess I just want to make my entire focus on my campaign is just trying to make everything a bit more accessible for everyone, but then also make sure that any issues that are brought forward, particularly surrounding societies, whether that's at an individual level or a larger scale, that kind of everyone's taken seriously with those issues, and to say, yes, we hear you, and we're going to show you and prove to you that we've heard you.
So your accessibility, accountability then?
Yeah.
Okay, thank you very much, Sky.
Thank you.